This morning, the Trump administration called off an attack. A strike package that had been prepared, positioned, and placed on the table as the credible military option behind the diplomatic demand, "The clock is ticking," Trump posted on Sunday, was stood down. CBS News reported the decision as evidence of serious negotiations toward a peace deal. The White House framed it as a sign that diplomacy was working. And somewhere in Tel Aviv, in a command center that has been tracking the same uranium centrifuges and underground enrichment halls for 2 decades, Israeli military planners read the same news and made a different calculation. Because the United States standing down does not mean Israel stands down. And the intelligence that every major Western government now holds suggests that Israel may not stand down at all. This is the story of Day 80. The day the war arrived at the most dangerous fork it has yet encountered. And what happens in the next 72 hours may determine whether the Middle East has a nuclear crisis or a nuclear deal. There is no middle option available anymore. The intelligence, what the U.S. knows about Israel's preparations. The CNN report, confirmed by multiple U.S. officials familiar with the latest intelligence assessments, is precise in its claims and carefully hedged in its conclusions. U.S. intelligence has observed 3 categories of Israeli military activity that, taken together, constitute preparation for an imminent strike on Iranian nuclear facilities. Intercepted Israeli communications, both public statements from senior officials and private exchanges that suggest an attack is being actively planned, not merely theorized. Observed military movements, specifically the repositioning of air munitions consistent with a long-range strike package against hardened underground targets. And the completion of an air exercise that multiple sources describe as a rehearsal for exactly this kind of operation. None of these individually constitutes proof. All 3 together constitute a pattern that the U.S. intelligence community is treating as a genuine warning indicator of imminent action. The key sentence from CNN's source: "The chance of an Israeli strike on an Iranian nuclear facility has gone up significantly in recent months, and the prospect of a Trump-negotiated U.S.-Iran deal that doesn't remove all of Iran's uranium stockpile makes the chance of a strike more likely." Read that slowly. The intelligence assessment is saying that a peace deal, the thing the Trump administration is actively pursuing, increases the probability of an Israeli military strike if that deal leaves Iran with its uranium stockpile intact, which means the better the negotiations go in the absence of full uranium removal, the closer Israel gets to unilateral action. Trump's diplomacy and Israel's military planning are on a collision point, and the collision point is the question of what happens to 460 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium. The uranium. Why 460 kilograms is the number that matters. U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff revealed earlier this month that Iran began the nuclear talks by telling the American delegation that its 460 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% could produce approximately 11 nuclear bombs. Not as a boast, as a negotiating position, as an argument for why Iran's leverage in the current situation is real and not theoretical. Iran was telling the U.S., "We have the material, we have the centrifuges, we have the knowledge. The only thing we don't have yet is a weapon, and that is a gap we can close faster than you can stop us if this negotiation fails." That statement, delivered to American negotiators at a formal diplomatic session, is the most explicit acknowledgement by any Iranian official in the history of the Islamic Republic that the country is within measurable distance of nuclear weapons capability. To understand what 60% enrichment means, civilian nuclear power reactors use uranium enriched to approximately 3 to 5%. The 2015 JCPOA limited Iran to a maximum of 3.67%. Weapons-grade uranium is typically defined as 90% or above. But the critical insight that nuclear proliferation experts have been emphasizing for years is that the hard part of building a nuclear weapon is not going from 60% to 90%.
The hard part is going from natural uranium, less than 1%, to 20%, and then from 20% to 60%. Those steps require the most time, the most centrifuge hours, and the most technical expertise. Once you are at 60%, the step to weapons grade is technically straightforward by comparison and can be accomplished in a matter of weeks to months at a facility like Fordo, which sits 80-90 meters underground inside a mountain, protected against conventional airstrikes by layers of rock that even the most advanced penetrating munitions struggle to defeat. This is the material Israel has been watching for 20 years. This is the material the United States has been trying to negotiate away for the last 80 days of this war. And this is the material that Iran, in its counterproposal, has refused to transfer out of the country under any terms currently on the table. Iran told U.S. negotiators that its uranium stockpile is enough for 11 nuclear bombs. It did not say this accidentally. It said it to make clear that the war's outcome, whatever it is, does not eliminate Iran's nuclear leverage. Even a military defeat leaves a country with 460 kilograms of 60% uranium that someone, somewhere, still knows how to use.
The Trump-Netanyahu fracture, the alliance under maximum strain. The relationship between the Trump administration and the Israeli government has been the central pillar of the military campaign that began on February 28th. U.S. and Israeli air assets struck together. U.S. intelligence and Israeli targeting fused seamlessly. Trump defended Israeli actions in every international forum. Netanyahu appeared at the White House in the weeks leading up to the war's launch and built the political consensus for an operation that most of Trump's European allies opposed. The alliance has been, by every public indicator, the closest coordination between Washington and Jerusalem since the Six-Day War. An Israeli strike on Iranian nuclear facilities without U.S. authorization would shatter that alignment in a single moment. Not damage it, shatter it. Trump, who has spent 80 days positioning himself as the man who can end the Iran war through the combination of military pressure and deal-making genius, would be placed in a position where an ally has unilaterally escalated the conflict over his explicit diplomatic objection. The peace negotiations he called off an attack to protect would be destroyed instantly. Iran would have no incentive to continue talking to a partner who cannot control its most important regional ally. The ceasefire architecture that Pakistan, Oman, and Qatar have spent weeks constructing would collapse. And the domestic political cost in the United States of an Israeli strike that Trump did not authorize, one that spikes oil prices further, deepens American involvement in a conflict he has been promising to end, could be severe enough to define the midterm election narrative. Netanyahu is aware of all of this. He has watched Trump carefully for 2 administrations. He knows exactly what an unauthorized strike costs in terms of the bilateral relationship, and he is reportedly preparing for it anyway, which tells you what Netanyahu believes about the alternative, about what the world looks like if Iran retains its uranium stockpile under a U.S.-brokered deal that does not include full removal. Netanyahu gave his answer on CBS's 60 Minutes on Sunday when asked if the conflict with Iran was over. Not over. If negotiations do not succeed in extracting nuclear material from Iran, we can re-engage them militarily. The word "we" in that sentence is doing a lot of work. It may not mean what it usually means. Iran's parliament speaker Mohammad Bakir Ghalibaf, who served as Iran's lead negotiator in the Islamabad talks, posted on social media on Monday after Trump rejected Tehran's counterproposal. His message was not a diplomatic communiqué. It was a direct warning. Our armed forces are prepared to deliver a lesson-giving response to any aggression. A strategy of miscalculation and mistaken decisions will always produce mistaken results. We are prepared for every option. They will be surprised. He followed it with a second post. The longer they drag their feet, the more American taxpayers will pay for it. Ghalibaf, notably, has been criticized by Iranian hardliners for being too conciliatory toward the U.S. during the Islamabad talks. This is Ghalibaf in hawkish mode. If the moderate of Iran's negotiating team is posting military warnings, the hardliners are saying things that are not being said publicly at all. Iran has also warned that any Israeli attack would be met with a devastating and decisive response. That response, if it comes, would not be limited to Israeli territory. Iranian officials have consistently indicated that a strike on nuclear facilities, which they describe as crossing a fundamental red line, would trigger retaliation against U.S. military assets in the region as well, on the grounds that Israel could not operate without American logistics, intelligence, and political cover. Whether that assessment is accurate after 80 days of degraded Iranian military capability is an open question. CENTCOM Admiral Brad Cooper testified to Congress last week that Iran's military has been dramatically degraded. But degraded is not destroyed, and Iran still has ballistic missiles, still has Hezbollah, and still has the ability to close the strait in ways that could sustain a months-long economic disruption even without functioning surface naval assets. What the next 72 hours determine. 3 scenarios exist for the next 72 hours, and only one of them does not permanently alter the trajectory of the Middle East for a generation. In Scenario 1, the Trump administration's diplomatic pressure produces a meaningful Iranian concession on uranium removal. Not full capitulation, but enough movement to give the U.S. a framework that justifies calling off the military option and gives Israel enough confidence in the outcome to stand its forces down. This requires Iran's leadership to reach an internal consensus that has so far been blocked by the IRGC, to accept terms they have publicly described as surrender, and to do so fast enough to forestall Israeli action. It is possible, it is not probable. In Scenario 2, the U.S. and Iran reach a deal that does not include full uranium removal, a partial agreement, a freeze, a suspension with international monitoring that Trump declares a victory and Iran declares a preservation of its rights. Israel, per its own stated conditions, strikes Iranian nuclear facilities anyway. The U.S.-Israel alliance fractures publicly, Iran retaliates against U.S. and Israeli targets, the war restarts at maximum intensity with a new nuclear dimension that changes every calculation. In Scenario 3, the talks completely collapse. Trump reinstates the strike authorization he called off this morning, and the U.S. and Israel conduct a coordinated campaign against Iranian nuclear and military infrastructure that is more comprehensive than anything executed so far. Iran responds, the region burns, the strait stays closed indefinitely. Day 80. Trump called off an attack this morning. U.S. intelligence says Israel is preparing one anyway. Iran has 460 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%, enough material for 11 nuclear weapons. Iran's negotiating team says there is no deal without Hormuz sovereignty and reparations. Israel's prime minister says the conflict is not over and military re-engagement is on the table. And the diplomatic window, the gap between a deal and a strike, may be measured not in weeks but in days. This is the moment this war has been building towards since February 28th. Not the naval engagements, not the ceasefire negotiations, not the Beijing summit. The question of whether Iran gets to keep its uranium. Everything else was prologue. One question. If Israel strikes Iran's nuclear sites without U.S. authorization in the next week, what happens to the U.S.-Israel alliance? Comment survives if you think the relationship is strong enough to absorb the break. Comment fractures if you think an unauthorized strike ends the partnership as we know it. Stay sharp. This one is not hypothetical anymore. The aircraft are moving.